Welcome to the Profit Answer Man, Michael Straza. It's great to have you join us today.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I appreciate the time.
Can you share a little bit about yourself and your business?
Yeah, I've been a business owner and operator of multiple businesses over the 25 plus years of doing this. And I've been anywhere from tech to healthcare, working on startups, kind of done it all. And my area right now that I'm focused on is a fractional CFO, COO work, working with for-profit and nonprofit companies.
It's funny you say that because most COOs don't want to look at the numbers. I shouldn't say that. They don't want to deep dive into the numbers. They prefer to be more on the process side. And so it's a rare skill to understand processes and systems and numbers and see how they all connect together. How did you end up with that connection yourself?
Well, a lot of it is over the years of work from working with physicians, working with administrators, owning a business, several businesses where I had to be the operations person. I had to be the CFO of the company. And they both tell something. In operations, you processes. I'm all about processes. How do those work? Do they work well or not work well? And from that is how does that correlate to numbers, finances? And that is such a big thing is you need both of them. And to have an understanding of both, I basically bridge that gap to be able to communicate and talk to people about how processes need to be and then how that fits in with finances. And so both sides can talk to each other because sometimes we think differently. When you think numbers, sometimes your brain is thinking a different way in how you translate that. And same thing with operations. So trying to bring those two together and making people understand from both sides, how does that work? And then also too, going to the CEO and saying, okay, we have an operations thing and we have a financial issue or a thing we need to work out or solve. And this is what we need to do.
Yeah, I understand the intersection because I'm a process guy, but I understand numbers. And being able to put them together, I find very few people do that. And that's kind of what I asked. And it's funny because when I look at the P&L, it's the processes and systems that are going on that don't show up anywhere in a single line item. They're like hidden behind the numbers. And when you start to realize that and you start to dig into it, you realize the reason the numbers aren't what they're supposed to be is a process problem or a system problem or something's going on behind the scenes that is just not clear in the financials because it doesn't show up in the financials.
No, it doesn't. And that's the thing is, and I know as you've experienced this yourself, is you look at a P&L, you look at finances, you know, when you look at numbers, like something doesn't seem right. Why is this line item the way it is? And that's the thing is you look at is trying to say, okay, this doesn't make sense. This should not be represented this way in the P&L. So then you kind of dig into it and you start digging into it from a financial side of things. And you're like, okay, let's look at this area and see was this recorded wrong? Was this, what was that all about? And then a lot of times you go back and go, okay, this is a process. And then you look at the process and then you go back to possibly employee or something and saying, okay, something's not right. Something is not being communicated or something is not happening.
And one of the biggest things we like to look at is labor efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I spend $1 on labor, how much are they giving me back in gross profit?
Right.
And that number alone helps me to judge whether we have a people process problem. Now, it could be a pricing problem. It could be that, hey, it really does take this long and you didn't realize it. And so you priced too low. But those are the different levers and they're not clear and they're not always easy to see within the system.
And that's the thing is you have to kind of dig in. It's like you want your return on investment. You're like, okay, here's 1 unit of labor, 1 FTE. What is that measured unit you're trying to use? And you're trying to figure that out and say, okay, it doesn't always tell the full picture. And that's why I like looking at both process and finance and saying, what is the total picture? And knowing, is it a pricing issue? Did I price something out wrong? Or originally it was this price, but now because of inflation and other things, or just things that weren't put in the numbers correctly, you have to relook at that and try to say, okay, is it a pricing, is it an employee, or is it a process that's in a factory that you're trying to produce something? It's like, well, this just doesn't work the way we thought it would.
And I also find it's also a utilization. So a people utilization. In other words, you paying somebody for 8 hours of work. And when you start looking at utilization, you realize they're only working 5 hours. Well, if that's the case, that's crushing your profit margin right there. And again, that doesn't show up necessarily as a line item in a P&L, like, oh, there it is. It's investigative work to find it, to figure it out, and to kind of poke it, which isn't always easy.
Yeah. And that's what I like about both processes and financials is I like to dig into the numbers and understand what the numbers say. What is it telling me or what is it not telling me? And then also too, looking at the processes and saying, okay, as I get into a company and work with people, I always look at, say, okay, what's going on here? And talking to the employees, looking at everything and trying to understand what they do, saying, okay, they have an 8-hour day. And yeah, not everyone, I've never been to a place where it's like truly anybody's going to give an 8 hours, complete 8 hours of full work. I mean, that's just, we're not built that way. We are going to take breaks and do these things. But it's again, also too, do they have the tools to do their job so it is more efficient? That maybe if it's only going to be truly 5 hours, how do we make the most efficient 5 hours? And are they trained the best way to do the particular job that they've been brought in to do? So that's always something I look at too, is like how efficient can we make that 5 hours or 8 hours?
And again, that's not a line item. You kind of have to discern and find your way. I find most people struggle a lot with this. Was that like a natural talent for you? Was it just experience and watching?
Yeah, a lot of it is for me. I've always been an observational person. I've always always want to know why and try to figure out that why. Why is something the way it is? And it's just something naturally I'm drawn to. Like I said, I love numbers because it tells so much, and you can do things with numbers, or you can say this is as far as we can go with this. There's a lot of times I would say numbers don't lie. But it's also a number that someone's put in there. So you have to see why was it put there and for what reason. And I think that's where you have to really evaluate. And that's what I enjoy. It's like a big puzzle. And I love solving these puzzles and making it more efficient, making the numbers. So the owner or CEO is like, here's what I've done. Here's what I've helped you do. We did it together. And it's exciting to see someone improve their business.
No, very much so. What's the biggest struggle that you see with business owners?
A lot of it is just sometimes business owners, if they're the original owner, like they started this and it's only been going for so many years, and even someone that's been doing it for 20, 30 years, is sometimes you started it and you have a base knowledge and you didn't surround yourself necessarily with experts, or it's hard to give up things that are that you've always done. So when you were small, you had a couple people, and now you're this very large organization. Is how did you build your foundation? And sometimes the foundation has to go. You have to go back and look at how the structure was done, and then teaching and showing how to do a different way or a better way. And I think that's sometimes the hardest thing for business owners to accept or want to change. But the great thing is, because my experience and have ownership of companies and started companies myself, I have that understanding. So we can commiserate or kind of talk about things and get in the right direction.
I'm a big fan of making sure that when you build your business model, you build the right foundation underneath it. And I think very few people actually map out their foundation and their growth pattern and their cash flow to be able to do it over time. They just kind of keep adding or growing or throwing money at a problem. They don't actually sit down and say, hey, if we run the math on this whole foundational way of doing business, does it scale? Does it cash flow? And do I have enough money to make it happen over time, or don't I? And it's a shame, because I think more often than not, if they just took the time to understand the foundation and the sticking points along the way, they could just adjust and make wiser choices and overcome most of the obstacles without much effort.
Yeah, I would agree. It is a tough thing to do. Again, going through experience that we both have had is just that one of the companies I started years and years ago is like we had, you do the business plan, you do cash flow analysis, you do all these things. It's like, oh, this is great. And you're very excited. And you put all this together, you go to the bank and you're trying to borrow money or whoever you're using to help finance some of it. And then all of a sudden, one experience I had is within the first year, we blew out everything that was even on that financial plan. It was like, we went from 5 people working to over 20 plus people, and we were in multiple states. We were only going to be in one state or one area. And then all of a sudden we grew so fast, we were growing 20+% at a time. And it was like, well, we kind of planned, and it's like our first plan. Then we just never got back to it because we're like, oh, we're too busy. You just said, we're just going to go. And then of course, you make mistakes because you're based it off a plan that is no longer effective, and it wasn't based off what you even designed it to. So then you have to say there, do we slow down, or do we keep going? And what do we do? Do we bring in experts? Do we just keep on trying and say, well, we're just scrappy, we'll figure it out? And sometimes that's good, and a lot of times it's bad, because then you go through some pretty bad growing pains to where how are you going to keep this thing afloat, or how are you going to continue to grow at a rate that you're not upside down to where you can't keep up with the burn rate that you're going through.
What do most people do in that situation where they get a little bit of success, maybe they get a little bit of ego, right? And then they hit a roadblock. And at that point, if they don't have a flexible workforce, they kind of get overwhelmed, don't they? They get run over by their success.
And that's the hard thing, is you will get overwhelmed. You have a lot of, depending on the personality, who you are and what you believe. And it's just like, you're like, okay, I'm going to double down. I'm going to this is painful. This is going through some growth pains. I want to keep my staff. I want to keep people going. They rely on this money for their families and livelihood, and have this thing that you see this big picture where you want to get to. And I think that's where that battle is saying, will I continue to push forward, or will I just say I'm done and move on to something else? And I've seen that where there's people that jump in and out to different businesses because they just can't figure it out. But the problem is the same issue comes up every time they do, in a different business or a different thing they're doing. It's like they still get to that point to where, how hard are they going to push through, or are they going to readjust and learn from what they've done before?
Business is supposed to be easy. I don't know why people make it hard. Let's make it easy. It's funny because as we go through growth, I mean, in the situation you talked about, the growth came first. And so you started adding people. I think a lot of times what I notice is people start adding people and capacity before the growth comes. And then if the growth doesn't come, or if it doesn't come as fast as expected, they get themselves behind the 8 ball in those types of situations.
Yeah, I've seen that where depending on what your structure is, depending if you borrow money conventionally, or you have angel investors or venture capitalists or somebody out there that's wanting to give you money. And that's the thing is like you have so many different things that you're hearing from, and you're trying to fight these battles of trying to say, what do I do? I'm not growing, I need to show that I'm doing something. So you add more people to help grow it, and then you don't get it. And then you're like, now what do I do? And then someone's, chirping in your ear saying, hey, don't forget, you said you'd have this, you'd have this profit, or we want this and we are not seeing this. So we're going to, be demanding. And I think that's where it depends on how you have it structured. If your foundation, again, going back to the foundation, how did you structure it? What were your expectations? What's the expectations of people that are actually helping you with this? And when things aren't going well, people all of a sudden remind you of all the things that you promised.
Find other people's money causes more harm than good. In other words, when you make money because your client's buying, things are good because it means you've got a provable product in a provable niche and people are doing it. When you start pushing, which is what happens when you have more money than you do maybe necessarily need, you start making bad choices, I think, or you start wasting your dollars.
Yeah.
Because you don't see it yet.
And that's hard. It's like everyone sees all these success stories out there of businesses, and they're like, you hear about it, you see it, people are talking about it, and you don't know necessarily what's behind the curtain, what's really going on. Is it really that successful, or they have a high debt that they're and the promises they have out there. We only see the great part of the outside of what everyone's doing, how successful they are. And you have to be careful about that, is who are you taking money from? And that's something I've always advised people. It's like, be careful. Just because someone's willing to write you a check doesn't mean that's the person you want to be in business with, because you don't know what's behind that check and what the expectations, even though they say, here's the expectation, it changes when there's either making money or you're losing money. People change on you very fast, and it's a learning experience. And you can warn people and tell them, but sometimes they have to go through it themselves. And I always feel bad and go, oh, I wish you didn't have to.
Well, and I think part of it is if you start relying on non-customer money for growth, you then shift your focus from selling to selling what you're selling to selling, I need your money
Right.
for fundraising, so to
Yes.
speak. And I think that dramatically, it's hard enough to keep an eye on the business and to be focused on the big picture. Now you're pulled two separate directions, which, Uber can get away with it, but there are very few Ubers. And I don't think anyone really, we don't keep a list of all the business failures, do we? We know that the rate is like 50% in 5 years, but nobody really talks about all these failures and how they could have all been prevented just by small differences. It's not big differences between success and failure.
No, there's not. It's a very fine line. And it's just, there, like you said, there's some great success stories, and everyone wants to be that success story because it's a great story to tell. But also, there's also a good story to tell about failures and what it was and what you learned from it. And I think that's where sometimes we have to be more realistic about those things and those conversations. And I think that's where you go into when you have someone you're borrowing money from or whatever. It's the whole idea of, what is your goal? Is your goal is to make profit? Is goal to provide an employment place for somebody? Is your goal to scale to be this big organization that's not just local, regional, national, it's international? What are you trying to scale to do? What is that thing? And it's like, that's where sometimes it'll get you a little bit, is cause problems. And I've seen that where people are like, oh my gosh, we're just have our customer base is growing, we're bringing in all this money, but in order for us to do even more, I need to borrow more money or borrow money in general. And then they get into a VC situation. And I've seen this where they get in there and they didn't know what they signed. They're like, they got all this money to do more. And then all of a sudden they realize they signed away their company and they got kicked out of their company because they had no idea. They didn't read the fine print because they're not used to having lawyers and things like that. And then they realize, oh my gosh, I was the owner, president of the company, and now I've been kicked out, and someone else owns it and, dismantles it later. And I think that's the sad thing, is that people, that part of education or knowledge, some people just don't know. You want to trust, and that's what happens sometimes.
Well, they're always so nice to you.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, but that right there to me is a red flag. If you're growing and things are going wonderful and you're like, but we need to borrow money, I'm like, well, then there's something wrong in your business model. Because if you're growing and things are going wonderful, why do you need to borrow money? And why don't you maybe change your business model so that the cash comes before the expenditure? And then this way you just grow through sales and not through becoming beholden to someone else and signing away your business, because that's no fun.
Yeah, and that's the hard thing is, yeah, I agree. It's like, it's the hard thing is when you're going so fast and you're like, but I can keep on doing this. And if I just have this much more, then I can do this much more on top of that. And it's enticing. And it's just like, you're in that moment. It's really tough. And I know another prime example of something is, I remember talking to where I was in a business where it's like, we needed money. We're like, hey, we need some more cash because we're trying to do this, and this. We're trying to do some basic, come up with our own, product that we were building, but we needed some cash to do it. Well, we were going through the conventional way of a bank, and they're saying, well, that's great and all, but you are going too fast. You're burning through money faster. You're not getting it because, of course, people pay late and they get, behind on terms, and you're, going with these big companies and they're thinking, oh, they're going to pay us on time. They don't pay on time. They move you around. You become their bank. And what happens is then our bank is saying, well, hey, why don't you slow sales down? And so let's catch up. It's like, that's hard to slow sales down. It's like, how do you do that? Say, sorry, customer that I want to have, or customer I currently have, we're going to slow down so we can catch up with our money. That doesn't go well. So it's one of those things. It's that weird tension. It's like, what comes first? Is the money coming in first, or is it growth, or how do you decide the balance of that? That's a very tough balance.
Well, so we have very easy way of slowing down sales. The first is one that I love. We raise prices because it doesn't take any effort.
Yeah.
And that will help increase cash. And second, we might ask for the money up front. So, hey, we're a little busy right now. We're behind the eight ball, but if you give us the money for the product now,
Yeah.
we will get it to you.
Yeah.
But if you can't, then we're going to have to put you in line. And so that forces the market will decide for you.
Yeah.
They'll
Is
show you.
Yeah, which is scary because then it's like this opportunity but if I raise prices or I ask for it up front, what is that? I might miss that opportunity. And it's like that's the thing, is that it's always that fear. I mean, unfortunately, you can't live off fear, especially if it negatively impacts your business or yourself personally. You can't run a business through fear. And that's the danger I think sometimes happens, is people lead with that and not be confident. Like you're saying, confidence in, well, we're just going to raise our prices, or we're going to ask for it up front because we believe in what we do. We believe in our product, and we know there's people out there that want to buy it. So we're going to go ahead and do this. So we're not going to, do it differently.
I think the bigger fear is not making payroll Friday, right?
Yes.
Because you got ahead of yourself.
Right.
Or not making the note payment or whatever
Yeah.
it is. That's kind of the bigger issue.
Right.
Is letting it get away from you.
Yeah.
And so you pick your fear, I'd rather be a little bit slower with lots of cash in the bank
Yeah.
than a lot faster and wondering how payroll's getting done this Friday.
Yep.
Pick your poison, right?
Yeah. You have your obligations, and that's something you always have to think about, is what do I want to do? Do I want to make payroll, or do I want to, what else? And I think that is like, I'm always very committed to the people I have promised things to my employees, to my clients, to whoever. This is my commitment. No matter what, this is going to happen. So I need to be better at what I'm doing to make sure those things are happening and not default on it.
No. And if you don't make payroll, I assure you, your people will quickly
Yes.
change
They will
what
go
they
find
do.
something else.
They will go find something else because they're living tight themselves. And
Yes.
that's a whole nother topic of how to teach your people how to build their own wealth so that they aren't living paycheck to paycheck. All of this kind of rolls towards how to scale versus grow your business. And these are two different things, because growing the business is fine, but it takes a lot more work. Scaling the business, I think, is easier if you have a scalable business. But in order to do that, you got to have all the things we talked about at the beginning, which is the systems and the processes and the repeatable delivery so that you can scale and it doesn't take as much effort the bigger you grow.
And I think that's the hard thing, is that a lot of times companies are wanting to scale, but they didn't build the processes. They didn't put it in place. It's like, I'll get to that next time. And then all of us, next time is a year, 2 years, 3 years. And you're like, I was supposed to do that. Yeah, that would have been very helpful for you to scale. You've seen growth overall, but trying to scale is, if you don't have those foundational things in place, it's going to be a really tough road. It's just going to be very difficult for you to be able to do that. And then you're just going to be like, well, I don't know why I can't get past this. Like, well, we were supposed to do these things years ago. We were supposed to do. That's what we were supposed to do to make this scaling a lot easier. And now you've made it 10 times harder. So then that's where you could actually start losing your own employees or your talent, because they're like, okay, I've seen this. We've been growing, but nothing's changing. And you talk about scaling, but we're not doing it in a way it's going to.
Yeah, but now you're going to ask people to change and to comply.
Yeah.
And people don't like change and compliance. Like, but I've always been doing it this way. Why do I have to change? Why do we have to do it that way? It's always been like this. And so if you don't build the always been like this properly to begin with, your people are going to hesitate. And like you said, we get busy. And so if you're not constantly building and tweaking the system as you go, the system gets out from underneath you. And then it's very hard to come back It's like you build a house, you really can't go back and change the foundation, can you?
It'll be very expensive if you
It'll
have to
be
change.
extremely expensive at that point because, how do you do that? And I think it's the same thing with business. If you took the time, we're back where we started, right? Build the right foundation and everything else kind of falls in place. But nobody wants to do that. I don't know why.
It's not, I think people think that's not the fun part. That's not the exciting part of running a business. They think of all the other things. And I think that's something that no one really puts a lot of time into at times. But we like this part. This is more exciting and growing and getting this new client or this client that has a name behind it. And you're like, oh, we're going to do this. And we keep on doing it. So we'll make it up as we go. We'll fake it till we make it. We'll all those phrases you've heard over the years. And it's like sooner or later it catches you because you're like, no, this is real. You can't fake it till you make it because that works for a period of time, and then you're going to be called to it sooner or later. And you're like, oh wait, now how do we fix this? And then you all of a sudden you lose that really famous or well-known client, and you're like, well, now what do I do? How do I do this? And I've seen this even not just having you have ownership. I've seen it recently in companies that I've been reading about where they grew so fast, they provided a service where people did subscriptions and did this, and all of a sudden they can't keep up, and they basically are closing down because they had a great idea, a great product, but their foundation was horrible. And now they basically are closing up shop because they've gotten to a fracture point where they cannot fix it. They can't go back. Like you said, the house is built and they got to fix the foundation. And now it's how do we can't do this without starting over. And we've already stretched ourselves too.
Or they create a bad reputation in the marketplace
Oh yeah.
because they're not delivering on what they're supposed to do.
And
that is difficult to overcome. You stop delivering, you get a whole bunch of bad reviews, and now you're behind the eight ball.
And that's where you see nowadays, back in the day when I first started businesses, you didn't really have reviews. Now it's like social media, depending on what platform you're on, it's just, it spreads fast where all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm listening to this person, watching this. And you start seeing these reviews and it's just like, oh, bad customer service. They don't answer this. The shipment is always delayed, or they charge me, but they didn't deliver the product. And all of a sudden it just gets worse and worse and worse. And whereas to the point where you lose your customers. And now you're like, well, we have all these expenses and we lost a certain percentage, but now it's puts us in a level where we can't operate efficiently or at all because we lost too many, because everyone has a bad opinion about who we are.
Let's talk about one other taboo topic.
Yeah.
And it's taboo not with us, but it seems to be taboo with business owners. Having large financial reserves because crap happens.
Yeah.
And business owners seem to have this allergic reaction to having excess cash in the bank.
Yeah.
So that if COVID, recession, a client leaving, somebody not paying doesn't cause panic because you've got the excess cash just sitting there. I know it's not growing that much. At least now you get a little bit of interest. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a tough one because with a cash reserve, it's like, okay, what are you hoping for? Worst case scenarios, like in your insurance policy, that you have this money. And I've seen so many things, from housing crises to COVID to whatever it is. There's always something every so many years. It's not, we're never going to get away from whatever that thing is going to be. And it's like, are you positioned in a way that you can ride that storm out and everything stops, or however you need to do that to have that cash reserve? And I think a lot of it is being educated more on what can you do with that cash reserve. What's the tax implications of holding on to it? Where you put it at, where can you put it to where you can possibly make money off of it so that it is drawing more than just whatever the basic number is. But again, it's really diversifying that put into something else that can be profitable long term, land, property, something else, and leveraging that. And that's where CFOs and accountants and other people, as we all get together and we talk about these things, like, what is the best way we can maximize this? Because I've seen places where the cash reserves are enormous, and it's like, but what are you doing with it? They're like, oh, we never thought. It's the worst cases, and they never thought about it. It's great they have it, but then they're like, but now we can maybe we haven't paid people, or maybe we can go back and help things out. And it's like, well, now that causes another issue that you have to figure out. There's always tax implications when you start distributing that money and what you're doing with it. So yeah, you always need to have some money for the rainy day, or big rainy day, a big storm. And what that number is, and do you let it grow? I always been a person where, like, you have a little bit and you continue every year. You have a goal to have so much in reserves to do things, and because there will be things that you might want to use it for long term. And again, you don't have to borrow necessarily against your own company if you have that money, or you can leverage it.
And I'm kind of the mindset that I think people are always worried about short-term growth versus long-term growth. And what I mean is, okay, maybe the money's sitting in the bank earning a couple percent, but when a massive opportunity comes up, for whatever reason, if you're sitting there with cash, you're at the front of the line where you hit the grand slam home run on a no-brainer decision. And you're like, who cares about the couple percent I was making? The opportunity that I was able to take advantage of because of having the cash is just massive. And the reality is, I was just listening to Joe Polish and Dan Sullivan this morning, and he's like, yeah, we have a year in the bank of all our expenses. And I'm like, yep. He's like, we sleep at night. He goes, I've been through too many bankruptcies and failures. And I agree with them. Like, you have that kind of money in the bank, you can survive anything. You can pivot, you can weather a storm, you can deal with all kinds of stuff. Money solves problems. And if you don't have any, it's at that moment that nobody wants to give you any.
Right. Well, when there's a crisis, no one's like handing out money and giving out
No.
whatever. It's never that way, and that's why I always when I go into an organization, I say, "What is your operating? How far can you operate at a certain level?" And they say, "Well, I only have a couple months." Well, we got to get you to 6 months. Okay, now we're going to get you to a year. Now we're going to get to 18 months. And I always say we're going to push a little bit further, because there will be some lean times, some hard times that you need that operating money, because it's not just for payroll, because you want to make sure you pay your employees, especially in some really tough times when, because everyone else has bills and things to take care of. But also, too, if you come to a point where the economy slows down enough to where you have no control over, it's not a orders have slowed down because someone's just not happy. It's just like, no, the economy slowed down. We're in a recession, or whatever you want to call it. And, something changes. You need to have that so you can ride that storm out and come out. Because if there's people that are competitors like you that sell the same type of thing, or whatever your product is, they will, who's going to last long, is matter how much assets they have and how much they have longevity to keep this going. It's not going to be like, oh, we like this person better. Well, no, they have money reserves in order to stay in the game. And then possibly, if you have the reserves and you get through it and they're not, you buy them.
Exactly. And that's the home run I'm talking about.
Yep.
You buy up all the competition, because market share is gained in bad times, not good times.
Yeah.
And that's what people need to realize. If people would like to learn more about you and connect, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah. You can go to my website. It's consultstraza.com is my website. LinkedIn is always a great place. You can see some of my content that I put out there, and also to just kind of my experience. And so those are the two biggest places you can find me to get to know me and reach out, direct message me. And, if you have questions, I always love, talking to people and figuring out what I can do to help them be successful.
Cool. We'll put that in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this unedited video of the Profit Answer Man podcast. If you'd like to catch the full episode and learn more about what we do, check us out at profitcomesfirst.com. We also go through the Profit First book in each and every chapter in the beginning episodes of the podcast, so check those out as well. Thanks for listening, and here's to you having a more profitable and growing business.